goes pear-shaped. That is, applying for Italian citizenship, which we know quite a lot of people have already done. A lot of people are considering it. We don't know the numbers, but it does seem like there might be quite a few. But before I actually go on and deal with the sort of more technical details of that, I'd just like to say thank you very much to the Vice Presidente Tozzoni for coming to this meeting, because we now are very concerned about what is potentially, well, it's a greater risk than it was, that is, that there will be no deal. And the problem that we all have now, that we literally fall into a big black hole on the 30th of March. And a lot of the rights that might be available through things like third country national status are all dependent on us being legally resident here. From midnight, 29th of March, when we are legally resident, to the 30th of March, when we are not. How do we then make an application to become recognised as a third country national? There are many, and so on. But that's, for us, is now one of the most important things, is preparation in the preparedness of the Italian government to deal with this potential scenario. Dealing with the questions of citizenship and applications for citizenship, I'm sure many of you already know and many of you may have applied. It's based in Italian law on 4 years of legal residence, after which you can apply for citizenship. Third country nationals, by the way, the period is 10 years. That becomes relevant to considering where we are now. There are a lot of applications that have gone in. They haven't been resolved, they haven't been processed, they haven't been decided. What we do not know is any of those applications that haven't been decided by the 30th of March, what will be their status and what will be the applicable criteria for considering them after the 30th of March. Will it no longer be 4 years? Will it be 10 years? So when you make your application, it's 4 years. If it isn't decided upon and completed by the 30th of March, is it suddenly going to become 10 years residence? We know from what has happened recently, the Decreto Sicurezza has imposed on us a further period of time in which they can be decided. So instead of it being 2 years to make the decision from the date of application, it's now extended to 4 years. That is retrospective. So anybody whose application for citizenship has been made but has not yet been decided, it is now under that decreto a 4-year period in which it can be decided. That takes almost all of us over the date of the 30th of March. So we're left hanging as to how we will be looked at after that date. If there is no deal, we have had no assurance that the criteria for considering our applications will continue to be the criteria that were in place when we made the applications. So is it 4 years? Is it 10 years? In addition to that, we now have a new requirement, and that is the language test. So for many people who have already put in their applications, we still do not know whether that language test is now going to be compulsory if you haven't yet been processed, decided. Actually, there was another point I wanted to make very quickly on the question of the time limits. There's talking to many of the people, our members of British in Italy. It appears that a lot of people were under the impression that if your application for citizenship wasn't processed within the 2-year time limit, it became automatically your right at the end of that period. That actually isn't the case. It never was the law. That was applicable only to applications for citizenship based on marriage. For residence, it was not part of the law. The law said it could be processed within it should be processed within 2 years, but there was no automatic right to it at the end of that period. Unfortunately, for those who are applying on the basis of marriage to an Italian citizen, that automatic default position at the end of the period for consideration has also now been removed under Article 14 of the Decreto Sicurezza. What we don't know is whether, in fact, for that point, I think it is also retrospective, so to unprocessed, uncompleted applications, that is retrospective if it's based on marriage as well. What we have been doing in British and Italy is from very early on, from last year, trying to talk to and get access to the people who have been negotiating and part of the negotiating teams in Brussels, as well as talking to Italian politicians. And we have had quite a lot of discussions with the Sherpas and the people who are responsible taking the messages to Brussels. But until now, we have not been able to get from them any assurances as to what will happen and how any of our situations will be considered post the 30th of March. Recently, we continued with this campaign in relation particularly to the Decreto Sicurezza with a mailing and a lobbying of members of Parliament, both in the Senate and in the Camera. We tried to get an amendment put forward in the Senate, which would be to make it the new period for processing citizenship applications not to be applicable, or not retrospective at least, but not as a second line of defence, not to be applicable to British applicants. The reason that we see that as being an important point is that we are the only group of people who are applying for citizenship who have had or are about to have all our rights taken away through no action of ours. For many of us, it is something that has happened to us, but imposed on us by a group of people who decided on a vote over which many of us had no right to vote on in any event. Other groups of migrants coming into the country do have other rights, but they are on the whole in a situation that is not being imposed on them by somebody else. Whether you come in as a refugee, seeking asylum for humanitarian reasons, you come in for work, you come in as an illegal. None of these are in the same situation as we are in, where we came into the country perfectly legally, established our lives here, many people working here, children have grown up here, and we expected to be able to live here and finish living our lives here. And suddenly, through the actions of others, we have all those taken away. And we've been lobbying the Italian government on that basis to say, please can you make an exception in these circumstances to our applications for citizenship to give us some protection. We keep lobbying. We keep going, and we hope, I don't expect that it will have any effect, but an amendment was put forward, we hope, in the Camera, which is it's being voted on this week, but whether it'll actually get anywhere is highly doubtful, unfortunately. Going on to just the last point about the language test. The language test that has been imposed on us, again, we don't know because the Decreto is actually silent on this point as to whether it is retrospective or not. So we don't know whether it's only going to apply to applications made from, I think, the 5th of October, unless the Decreto falls, but it's the 5th of October it came into effect. So any application after that date, the applicant has to sit and pass a language test. There's been a few jokes running around as to why it's the level of the language test is B1. Salvini apparently thought this was 81. Perhaps he needs new glasses or something, we don't know. But anyway, or maybe it came in the middle of other problems. But it was B1 is the level that is being required of people, and it is only through a recognised institute or an institution that is recognised by the Ministero dell'Istruzione. They have to be a neo-recognised institute to be able to give you the certificate for this language test. It's higher than the existing language test for third country nationals who are applying for a soggiorno di, what is it, permesso di soggiorno di
soggiornanti di lungo periodo.
Esatto. Sì. They only have to pass a language test at A2 level, which is quite a lot lower, in fact. But still, we don't know yet exactly where that's going. Other than that, anecdotally, we've heard rather scary stories about the differences in levels expected in different institutions. When somebody has a B1 test, some of them are quite relatively sort of easy and everyday Italian. For others, it seems that you virtually need a knowledge of literature, of goodness knows what, but they are requiring a very high standard. This obviously causes a lot of hardship to various groups amongst the British citizens in Italy, particularly the old age pensioners like myself and the very young, where actually trying to pass this test is quite difficult. There are people who have, for various reasons of infirmity or handicap, who will find it very hard to be able to deal with this language test. In the third country national, the legislation dealing with their applications for long-term residence, there are actually exceptions made on a certification from an approved medic or somebody similar for those who really have got problems in trying to learn the language to that level. We again, in our lobbying of the Italian Parliament, have been asking for something to be put into the Decreto to say, well, if there has to be this language test, that there should also be the provision that allows for us to have exceptions for those for whom it is actually very difficult to learn. Again, I don't think any of us should hold our breath. I doubt we will get it, but we hope. And in the meantime, I guess we will just keep lobbying. Doing what we can.